Welcome everybody to the CCDE journey. I've called this presentation, but it's really just it's an hour session or so to help anyone who's attempting the CCDE version 2 practical exam, which the final attempt for that is going to be the 26th of October, I think. So this is really just a session that I thought I would do, given it's the last opportunity to sit the version 2 exam, to help people from my own experience, hopefully, and give some tips and tricks as to how I cracked the exam. It took me a few attempts, but I did get there in the end. But I can cover a bit more about myself and the journey as we go through. So, who am I initially is what we'll cover in this slide, or is what is shown in this slide. I won't dwell too much on the facts, because if you've joined this session, I'm guessing that you know who I am. So I've been in networking for a long time, since early 2000s, multiple certifications across different vendors, not just Cisco, and my sort of approach to obtaining the CCDE was quite standard. I've got CCNP, CCNA, CCNP as well. I don't have a CCIE, which is one of the things that probably makes me a little bit different to most people who are attempting this exam. Most people, obtain a CCIE and then they go down the CCDE route, but they are very different exams in respect to the mindset that you need to have in order to pass it. And I've had one attempt at the CCIE service provider version 4, but now that's changed to version 5, so I'm looking at doing that, and I'm almost doing it in reverse. So yeah, I've worked as a network engineer, consultant, architect, and now a trainer, and I own my own company called MNB Networks. I've designed and deployed many different networking technologies, and doing a lot of WAN stuff over the last 4 or 5 years. So this is the agenda. We're going to cover why the CCDE, or why I done the CCDE, things that I mention might be or have some synergy with why you guys are doing it. The CCDE written, I won't dwell too much on that, because I realise that the folk on this call are more interested in the CCDE practical. So I've got quite a lot of information about the approach that I took in order to actually pass the practical. But it was definitely a journey for me. Some of the resources, again, this close to the exam, I would say it's probably a bit late to change the resources that you're using that much. So yeah, but I'll cover some of the things and the battle scars, or some of the tips and tricks, I suppose, that I used to pass the exam. So first of all, why did I do the CCDE? I never really got to doing a CCIE. The reason that I never really got to doing a CCIE is because I was busy doing other things, living life throughout my 20s. I done CCNA, CCNP, CCDA, CCDP. I got various promotions in the workplace and moved between roles, and I also moved to different locations in the UK and things like that. And by the time I probably got to the level where I wanted to do an expert level certification, I was more sort of like working in like pre-sales and solution architecture type work, specifically focused in networking. I had about 13 years experience in the industry and 8 years experience in networking, so 13 years in IT and 8 years in networking, when I decided to actually do the CCDE. And as I said, I just wanted an expert level certification, but because I wasn't living in code all day, every day, I figured that CCIE probably was not the best, path for me to take. And then the CCDE, I had been thinking about it for a couple of years, but never really went into it. So I then negotiated as part of a job role that I took, financial support, which I ended up having to pay back what I borrowed anyway because it was an agreement. So that's probably a separate conversation. I'm not saying never do that. It was just circumstances that I was there for 3 years and then moved on to a new role as I passed the CCDE. So I attempted the CCDE in August 2017, but then had to wait 12 weeks to find out if I had passed the exam. And during that time, I left the company and went contracting and started MNB Networks. But yeah, like if you take financial support as from your employer, I would just say think about it and go in with your eyes wide open that you might have to pay the money back, which is fine. It's no issue at all because that's what was agreed, but it is a consideration. I think I've already covered this where I thought it aligned to the type of work I was doing better. So working in pre-sales at a Cisco Gold partner, and it just fitted better with what I was doing. Although I was still getting involved in like low-level escalations and things like that, I wasn't like working on projects and stuff unless it was design-related issues, and it had come full circle back into design for a solution architect to actually try and help resolve a design issue. And the final reason, but probably one of the most important reasons, is I like to do things that make me stand out from the crowd from a capability perspective. And CCDE is certainly a unique certification to the industry. There's not really another certification that tests what the CCDE tests you on, and your thought process, not only technology, but your approach as well. That's why I done the CCDE. So some of those might align with you and some of them might not. The CCDE written approach for me, it took about, 3 or 4 months to pass it. So I was like May 15, I started studying, and then I think I passed in July 15. And then after that, so how did I actually do that? The first thing that I done was I watched some Cisco Live videos and sessions where they talked about what the CCDE was, what technology was included in it, and I've got some examples of how I recorded that information and absorbed it and then learned what I needed to learn in the following slides. In summary, I identified all of the technologies that I thought were in scope. You see some of these here, which are a bit weird and wonderful. So MPLS, traffic engineering, QoS, EMVPN, GetVPN. These are things that you could probably say to someone and most people would know what these things are or kind of what they're needed for. And that was probably one of the mistakes that I made in my CCDE early studies, as I thought you just needed to know what they are and kind of what you need to do with them. But that actually could not be further from the truth. If I'm being completely honest, you need to be able to understand. You don't need to be able to code them and be able to implement these things, but you definitely need to know some extent of the level of how to implement them. So what I mean there is you don't need to go through the CCIE enterprise and know how to do everything in that blueprint. And you don't need to go through the CCIE service provider and know how to do everything in that blueprint, because you're not going to be asked to set up an MPLS network or an SD-WAN or something in the exam. Yeah, the CCDE written, no, let me start again, where I was going with that. What do you need to know from a technology perspective? You're not going to be asked to actually like configure a CCIE service provider or a CCIE enterprise environment, but in order to design the solutions effectively, you definitely will need to know how these things are configured past just knowing what they are. So it's not like CCIE level knowledge of how the technologies work, but it's more, you definitely need to know more than, MPLS, so yeah, that's a multi-protocol label switching, and you can do L3 VPN and L2 VPN. You actually need to know about the different ways of deploying it and what you would use it for and why. And the same with traffic engineering. There's multiple different ways that you can implement it. QoS can be rolled out in multiple different ways in the service provider space versus the enterprise space, and things like DSCP versus class of service versus EXP, how these things map end to end. You can't really just learn all that by reading a book. You have to put a bit of thought into it, maybe lab some things up, but not to the extent where you're preparing for a CCIE. But I'll talk more about that as we go through. In my particular case, I knew about some of these things where some of it scratched the surface. I knew about some of it. Sorry, that's not right. I knew some of it already, and some of it I had to learn from scratch. So I knew pretty much nothing about, and I needed to, kind of learn about that as part of the process, as well as, aligning that to the blueprint. So I definitely had some gaps on the on the technologies and had to plug those, and I'll explain how I've done that. Can I just ask again? So, like, the reason that I'm asking this is that my screen has like the red sharing link around the PowerPoint presenter view, when I think it should be. So is it like just all you see on the screen is the slide, or do you see the slide and the next slide in my notes? Just the slide, all right, okay, that's good then. PowerPoint's just messing with my head, or Zoom is, then happy days. Right, so what did I do then in order to plug the gap in these technologies? And it was mainly for me the service provider side of things that I needed to plug the gap on. So I started off by watching a lot of Cisco Live videos, and I had about 40 of those that I watched multiple times. I made notes as I was watching the video. How I done that would be, I had a whiteboard on the wall in my office. I would play the video and listen to it. So these things are like between 1 to 2 hours, Cisco Live sessions. And I would just whiteboard the notes as the presenter was talking, and then take a picture of the notes, and then make some more notes, maybe in Word or OneNote or something like that on my PC after that. And this was my initial approach, and that did get me through, in combination with many books on Safari. If I was to talk about specific books, I would say Optimal Routing Design, MPLS Fundamentals, and a few others which were pretty important. But you could read 20 books on this. Some of them are that when you see the reading lists of CCDE, there's like 20 books. I don't personally think that you need them all, but it does really just depend on your own skill level. That's the other thing I'll say about the CCDE, is you can't really give the same answer about how long it's going to take, what do I need to study and all that to the same person, because everybody's got different skill levels and everybody's got different experience and things like that. So it does depend on the person and where you are in your journey, how experienced you are in design and all that kind of thing. INE, I don't know if anybody here has an INE subscription, and I do have one still, but I've not logged into it for quite a long time, and I know they've revamped everything. But they do have like they call it a CCDE course, but I would say it's like a CCDE course in inverted commas. So it's not, they do cover some slides, but it's more focused on some scenarios, which are test scenarios, which are actually quite good just for getting in, the practice. But it's not really, I wouldn't say the INE CCDE course. It's quite old now, Brian McGann, but it's good content. But I wouldn't say that it's CCDE written preparation. It's more CCDE lab preparation. So going into the watching the Cisco live videos, this was the first whiteboard that I made in my CCDE preparation. And if you see up in this top part here, this kind of reminds me of the CCIE picture where you see like how the person looks when they start the CCIE study, and they're all happy and all the rest of it, and then as the time goes by further towards the CCDE, they look like a broken man or a broken person. And this one here was me all enthusiastic. Cisco CCDE, I'm going to pass it by the 19th of the 11th, 2015. So what I thought was going to happen was start my new job in May, pass the written in July, and then I went to Jeremy's boot camp in October, and then I attempted the practical in November, which was this date here. I think if you look back through the scheduled CCDE exam dates, that would have been a date that the CCDE was scheduled for, which I did attempt and I failed miserably. Why did I fail miserably? Because I totally underestimated the exam. I'll explain some of the reasons why after that, after this particular slide. So what is this particular slide? This was, I don't know what the session number is, because I remember this from the last time, but if you see here, I've got, what I used to do in most of them is like, in that top left-hand corner, I would put the Cisco Live session, so BRK-3052 DMBPN. This obviously isn't DMBPN. This is an about the CCDE type session. And what we have here is it's split into like multiple different areas, where these areas down here were the main topics on the right hand side. And as this session was getting talked about and I was watching it on video, I was taking these notes on my whiteboard. When you look to the left of this, we've got information about the different types of questions. So simulations, they're the most complex. Drop links and devices into the correct place. And yeah, so the shorthand there that made sense to me at the time, but I was really just trying to get an appreciation of what the exam was all about. I also, took information about what are the scenarios like, the best preparation, so is to design networks. You can't really beat designing lots of different networks, speak to customers, request information and experience. So as I said, I had about 8 years design experience when I started the journey in 2015, but I had about 13 years experience in IT. So I just thought, I'll just try this thing. I'm very experienced. I'll just, have a couple of attempts and I'll pass it. But it was kind of like, not really like that for me. So other things that I took a note of were like, there's hotspot questions where you've got, like a matrix. I think these were the hotspot ones. So you say that one's right, that one's right, that one's right. And it'll say select all the things in the table that's correct. So you would select the correct things in a multi-hotspot type table. But you see, like, there's a breakdown here, like the different question types, multi-choice, with a branch. I don't know how, if you're all familiar with the branching scenarios, but a branch question is like, what technology would you use to meet the requirement? And you say OSPF. So that's the first part. And then the next question might be, why did you pick OSPF? And that's the branch question. And how the or the child question, whatever it is you want to call it, and how Cisco explained it in the session is that you might get 0 points for the first question because it's a fairly easy answer as to which protocol you should pick. But the second question that you answer is potentially is you justifying why you picked it, and why is always the more difficult question to answer than what. Because you can pick anything. You could have a problem that multiple different protocols or technologies or features could resolve, but when you actually look in the requirements, and this is way too straightforward, but if it was just something as basic as it has to be open standards based, then it's not going to be OSPF. Sorry, it's not going to be EIGRP. If it's EIGRP versus OSPF, it's going to be OSPF. It's never that simple in the CCDE. It's more like you have to find what the requirements are. So yeah, that's what the branch questions are. And that's what it's really saying. If I zoom in here, it gets a bit blurry, but round just below where that says pick D, different child, no points for, I don't know what that says. Yeah, so basically no points for the first question, but you might get 1 point for the child. And then also the other thing just below that is Cisco sort of, indicated that you might get some points for a suboptimal solution. So you might not get full points if you pick option B, but you might get half a point or 1 point instead of 2, which makes it all even more like quite challenging. So the testing engine and how it's scored and all that kind of thing is just all, it's internal to Cisco. Nobody knows how it works, but there's different, mechanisms that they use in order to actually score the exam. So just moving to the left of that a little bit, then you've also got like drag and drop questions, and charts as well. So you can see that there's multiple different question types. And again, I don't know how many people have attempted the exam, but I don't think this has really changed in version 3 either, but it's definitely relevant to version 2. So you've got hotspots, multiple choice, branch questions, drag and drop, charts, pick 3 of 5, or pick all that are applicable. And I don't think, and then there's also the drag and drop is like put a route or put a device in the place that you think will fix the customer's problem on this diagram, and you can interact with a diagram. So yeah, I think we covered drill down. Let's see what we have here. So here we have, the branch questions mentioned again. They're kind of like a theme all the way throughout the exam as well. So the branch questions are, there's quite a lot of them, or normally there is. So what they advised to do for the CCDE version 2 is to drill into the technology topics in the written exam. So that's going back to, these topics down this right-hand side. If you drill into those and you know those technologies and you know how they are layered on top of each other, and if you implement something, it might break something else. That's really what they're saying there. And you can see that there's a lot of different technologies there. So you've got layer 2 all the way up to BGP. So everything that you can think of in layer 2 in the enterprise space, but also in the service provider space. So you've got your spanning tree, your trunking, all VLANs, all this type of thing. But fake sharing in regard to like if one thing fails, then multiple parts of the network might fail. But then in the service provider space, you've also then got like L2 VPN, like pseudo wires, VPLS, all that kind of stuff. And then into layer 3, you've got your IGP routing protocols, OSPF, EIGRP, ISIS, and RIP is even still in the exam, I believe, because there could be a use case for it. For example, with a tactical design or something like that. And then you start getting into it's down here that we're sort of focusing on this area here. The layer 3 stuff, you've also got like service provider L3 VPN, L2 VPN, pseudo wires, security, even though DMVPNs doesn't, the thing, like, for example, in the CCDE, which always blows your mind, is people go, oh, is DMVPN a security protocol? And you're like, well, it could be, but if it's based on multi-point GRE, and then you can use encryption if you need that, but you don't have to use the encryption side. You could just use multi-point GRE, for example. But then if you add IPsec, then it becomes secure. So you might get a scenario where it's like, use a protocol that does not require encryption, but can create dynamic site-to-site tunnels between sites on demand. So that might, I just made that up on the spot, but that could be like for an example of something where never assume that things are as they seem in the CCDE. It's not like it's full of trick questions, but they really do try and get you to think about the correct answers. All right, so they've also, like, just to like in the interest of time, some of the other things on here. So you can see the other technologies, multicast, every aspect of multicast, every aspect of IPv6. You need to cover it. You can't skip things. You need to cover it all and understand it and how it works and where it would be used. These are the bit at the bottom here. These are the merge and divest, adder technology, scaling and growth, and a design failure. So I think all of those are quite self-explanatory. A design failure is like, these are what the scenarios might be based on. So it's like company X has tried to do this, but they've got this issue and they need a solution for it. Based on everything else that you've read in the documentation, what do you suggest? And then after you suggest something, it's probably going to say, why did you suggest that? So what have we got? So the design life cycle, they're talking about like analyze the requirements, design, then implement, then validate and optimize to meet the business requirements, technology requirements. And these are just notes that I took from the session. And then this was some more technology domains, but it basically repeats or drills into the right-hand side of this diagram. Some things on the left-hand side, we probably don't need to, this is just specific stuff about convergence and yeah, so the exam is revolved around the scenario. So don't, like, what this part is really saying is, if you get asked a question, don't select an answer based on something that you've done in the real world. Make sure that you're focused on what the scenario is asking you for. So you have to, when you go into the CCDE exam, you have to empty everything out your head that you've ever done. If I'm being completely honest, from a design perspective, if you ever say, oh well, in this scenario I done that, that doesn't matter. What you have to focus on is the scenario that's being put in front of you in the CCDE. The scoring, this part over here on the left-hand side, they did give this information in that session. So there's optimal and suboptimal answers throughout the exam. So the thought process there, you shouldn't I don't think anyway you should get points taken off. So what they're trying to encourage you there is, even if you don't know the answer, you have to pick something, and it won't take you down the wrong road for the whole scenario. But for example, if you go back to those branch questions that we were talking about, and you answer the first branch question wrong, and you say, is it OSPF or EIGRP, and then you pick OSPF, and it's wrong, and then the next part of the question goes to EIGRP, you probably know that you're going to get, you know, you've got that wrong, or it might not indicate that to you. So it is quite mentally challenging in the exam, but you've just got to try and keep calm as you go through. So you can see this whiteboard here, right? I've got about 25 of these, and I've got another couple of examples. So this was just, what's the CCDE all about? And then I rubbed that whiteboard out, and then here's one on OSPF in large scale networks. So this is the type of thing. So I would say BRK RST 2310 was a session, and it's called OSPF in large scale networks, and this was the shorthand that I took for that particular session. The next one is virtualization over the WAN, BRK RST 2045. You can see there's multiple different things about types of service, MPLS, blah, 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 blah. If you watch this video back, you can pause it and have a look at some of the things. And one of the things that I would say is, like, even though I've got a lot of information here, one thing that I always remember was I had a study group of about 10 or 11 people, maybe a bit more, maybe it was 14 or something, but there was 10 to 12 of us that used to meet up every weekend and talk through things. And I shared one of these just to show the rest of the team what sort of thing I was doing and using as my approach. And somebody said, maybe it wasn't this slide, but they went, see this thing here? That's not factually correct. And I went, well, look, I'm not sharing it to say everything that I'm doing is right. I've watched a Cisco live session. I've taken the notes in shorthand. This is my interpretation of what they were saying. And now I'm taking that forward to drill down into all these topics. So, for example, up here in the top right-hand corner, this is an example from the session probably that I was watching on, there you go, BRK RST 2501 Enterprise QoS. So they probably gave an example of a 4-class model and how applications, so on the left-hand side, you've got the 4-class, where it says 4-class model and 8-class model. It's talking about how 4 classes would map into 8. So I would take the example from the video that I was watching, and then I would take that away and study it in more detail myself. And then that's where I would then start reading, like, the Enterprise QoS book by Tim Seghetti or something like that, or certain chapters from it. So that's just a more of a general comment. So I think personally, as long as you're getting, like, the notes down somewhere, whether it's OneNote, on a whiteboard, on an electronic whiteboard, in Word, whatever your preference is, because everybody's different, you definitely need to take notes and build up a technique on how to study things. And this is just another example of another one, which this is like redundancy mechanisms with L2 VPN, which, you know, some of the things that I watched were absolutely mad. Yeah, I can share the white. Yeah, I've got a question or a comment saying it would help if you can share the whiteboard screenshots. I don't mind doing that, but all I'm saying is I'll share a few examples. I'm not sharing all of them, but the ones that are on this scenario, I can share, because if you just take my notes, then it defeats the purpose, and it's like me saying, here you go, when the only way you're actually going to learn this stuff is if you do it yourself. But sure, I can share a few of these ones that I've showed as an example to give you an idea how to do it, if that's okay. But yeah, there's not much benefit in me giving you like all of my whiteboard screenshots, because that's what I've done for my preparation. And you know, although the technique might help, my notes might not help you, because you might know more about a particular topic than me. But yeah, no problem, I'll do that. But yeah, no, I found that a really good technique. It is time consuming, and you have to sort of roll the sleeves up, and it can be a bit tedious. But when I look back at it now, I'm actually quite proud of, you know, the fact that, you know, I've done it like that, because I've got those notes forever now as well, which is quite good. And I took a picture of it every time. So I've only got one whiteboard, and I've actually got an electronic whiteboard on my PC now, but I never had that in 2015. All right, so that's really about the CCDE written and learning about the technologies, and this all gears towards the CCDE practical, right, which is what most of you guys are heading towards. So yeah, I did fail a few times. I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but I'll give you like a high level understanding of how I approached and why I think I was doing things wrong. So my first attempt, I was a lone ranger, and what I mean here is that I basically got the blueprint off the Cisco website. I thought I knew, like, I mean, like, because I was very experienced, like, in network design. And I thought, like, and designing a lot of different types of technologies, and never really, you know, designing anything incorrectly or with any issues. So I thought, like, I'm great at this. And the CCDE was a proper wake up call that if there ever was one, that it was like, you can never stop learning, especially when I started getting into a study group. So first of all, I was a lone ranger, right? And then you probably know Zig Ziglar. He basically, I never knew him before late 2015, and then he invited me into a study group with several sort of well-respected CCIEs and CCDEs now, so I was quite lucky from that perspective who my study group were. I won't name drop people, but some people who were, it was kind of like quite lucky that we were all in the same boat going for the CCDE and as committed as each other. And I think that's really when things started to turn for me. Although attempts 2 and 3, I kept getting stuck at like 60%. And when I actually passed the exam, the reason that I think that I was getting stuck at 60% and failing is because I just wasn't getting it, and I wasn't deep enough on the technology. So if you go back to this slide here, and you look at this technology list on the right hand side, and then you look at this, which is almost like a zoomed in version, you almost need to like zoom in another layer down, in my opinion, in order to actually pass the exam. You need to know how the protocols work. And although it's not like you need a CCIE to pass, because obviously there's people who have CCDEs and don't have a CCIE, you definitely do need to know how the protocols work, how they would be implemented, and what the dependencies are on each other, what would break something, what order you would implement things in, and why you would pick one over another. That's probably the most important part, why you would pick one over the other. So when I basically took a long break from it, because I was very, very fed up with, you know, getting stuck at this 60%, because I was having conversations with my peers, people were passing the exam, and I was stuck here. And the first attempt, let's say you have like 30 to 35 questions per scenario. One of the most important things here in this exam is time management. Now, I don't know who's sat the exam yet, but there's different reasons why time management could become a problem. My issue was if I was on question 1 of 30 to 35 and I was stuck, I would just sit there and look at it, right? And then 5 minutes later, bearing in mind 30 to 35 minutes, 30 to 35 questions after you've taken the fact that you've got to read about, 4 to 8 documents at this, or skim them at the start of the exam, just to understand the scenario. So if that takes, I spent 45 minutes reading these in attempt 1. Now that's ridiculous, and because I'm a slow reader, or I was before I passed the CCDE, and I'll talk about some of that as well, right? So I'm sitting there getting absolutely consumed. Yeah, Ahmed, yeah, I agree with you. I spent time getting consumed by reading the content, because we're all good at our jobs, right? We're all good at our day jobs. And a customer says to you, design a network for me, Malcolm. How do you do that? You say, right, okay, no problem. Give me all the documentation that you've got. Give me configs and show outputs that show all this stuff so that I can understand your routing protocols. And I'll go through it with a fine tooth comb for the next week or couple of weeks, and then come back to you with a proposal, right? And what happens in the CCDE is, if you go in with that approach and you want to do the best by the customer, and you take your working approach into the exam and spend lots of time looking through things, you're going to fail because of time mismanagement. You're just not going to have enough time to think about the correct answer. You're not going to have enough time to pick the correct answer and justify it. And then if you don't know the technologies, or all of the technologies, you're also then going to be thinking, right, so if you think about all the things that you've got to think about in this exam, let me see, right, so all the things you've got to think about, you've got to think about the documentation that you're provided. You've got to know the technologies. You've got to read the question, and then, where possible, refer back to the documents. You've also potentially highlighted text in these documents, and if you highlight too much, you can get lost and you don't know where to go back and look. So if this is text in a document, and you go, oh, highlight that, highlight that, highlight that, you're like, it's all just like, that's all just yellow. Do you know what I mean? Like, and then it's hard to go back and find. So, there's a lot of things, and then you've also got the time ticking down, and the fact that you've got 4 scenarios in the day. But if you don't know the technology fully, or as well as you need to, then that's going to cause a problem, because where you could look at a question, if you've got 2 to 3 minutes, let's say, per question, which is what it basically comes down to, 2 to 3 minutes per question, and you don't know the technologies, and if you spend 5 minutes on, I don't know, 4 questions, that's 20 minutes of your time. And it's too long. You have to be answering questions ideally in 1 to 2 minutes. So that's like time management. And the going to these attempts 2 and 3, the 60%, I think that I was getting better at time management, but I just thought, one thing just to sort of highlight, it's not possible to just go, right, well, I've sat the CCDE, so I'll pass it next time. It's not a brute force exam. You'll not be, unless you're properly prepared, you won't pass this exam. It's not like I'll go in October, and if I fail, then I'll go again in February, and then if I fail, I'll go again in May, and then I'll pass. you can't do that. So this particular point here is how I combined with this one here. So I took 9 months out and of attempting the exam, and then me and my study buddy, which is a guy called, he's not that active on social media, but he's a guy called Igor Asadachuk. We, for 9 months, done stuff like, right, what we're going to do to learn this is we're going to go IP, and then we're going to go IS to IS. And then from there, we're going to go IPv4, we're going to go IPv6, we're going to go redistribution, we're going to go TE, MPLS TE, or traffic engineering with, I don't know, RSVP. And then it's like, right, now we're going to go MPLS, and then it's like L3 VPN, L2 VPN, and then you break this out into OSPF, sham links, and you can see, right, so after that, then we go MPBGP, and then IPv4 unicast, then we go VPN v4 unicast, then we go IPv6 unicast, and then VPN v6 unicast. Labs. That was the difference between me passing, and it was like, it wasn't just like, right, let's lab up all these technologies. I would then say, Igor, see how we've done this? I've got a question for you from a design perspective. And then it was like, okay, if we enable IPv6, let's break IS to IS with single multi-topology. So single topology, multi-topology, which then breaks the IS to IS protocol, which then breaks this and then breaks this. So this is still there, but because we've done something in IS to IS, we've broken all this. And that is how I eventually passed, in my opinion. So I'm not saying that's for everyone, but what I'm saying is that it definitely got me over the line, or played a big part in it. Because being brutally honest, I didn't know the technologies well enough. All right, so that was my CCDE practical approach. Started off as a loner, studying on my own, then joined a study group, but I was getting stuck at this 60%. Then took a long break from it, and then done the lab scenarios, and then it's not possible to brute force it, which I was getting a bit fed up with it. So I think that this summarises my attempts or my approach. So I joined a study group with 10 to 15 after attempt 2 when I failed with the study group. We had weekly 3-hour sessions on a Saturday and sometimes on Sundays as well. We joined a Slack group where we were basically like family. Every day for 12 to 18 months, we were on Slack. Not all day, every day, just we were on Slack. We were all going for the same thing, and we all helped each other in respect to, preparing presentations like I'm doing just now, but it might be like on IPv6 or MPLS L3 VPN, and not to lecture each other as teaching each other, but to put content up to discuss on the 3-hour sessions. We also all wrote mini scenarios and shared them with the group. These are the blueprints. So those Cisco Live presentations, that I was talking about, we would take them and we would summarise them in our own. We would summarise them in our own words. So we would watch, see, like similar to that, those blueprints and sorry, those whiteboard sessions that I put up. We would put it into a Word document, and then somebody would nominate themselves to run the session. But it wasn't like that person running the session was responsible for teaching everybody else. It was that person has the responsibility on behalf of the group to come prepared on Saturday to talk, to have a blueprint ready or a skeleton Word document to talk about OSPF or BGP or IS to IS or L3 VPN or tunneling. And we all took turns. So it was brilliant, the fact that, we had these 10 to 15 people that were all of very high caliber, and they were all committed. There was actually more than the 10 to 15, but it was about 12 people that pretty much attended every week, between 8 and 12, give or take, family commitments and things. So, is somebody asking a question? Or no, I'll just continue then. So yeah. Examples, I don't know what that actually was. I think it was just, I don't have any of the examples handy, but I could maybe, I don't have any of those handy at the moment. And then I explained how we built the labs, and also we didn't just so one of the things I'd done was I used the SPv4 CCIE blueprint to use as a basis for my lab environments. And then Igor, my buddy, was my study buddy in the end, where some of the other people were passing the lab. We ended up just sort of going off in our own little group and really focusing in on the lab aspect. So the resources that we used, or I used, were CCIE Service Provider Advanced Technologies course from INE. So that was like learning how to build service provider networks from scratch. So I used to listen to those and watch them in the car on the way to my work, on my commute. At the time, it was like 1.5 to 2 hour commute. So I used to watch that course and listen to it, and I was also labbing the stuff up with my study buddy as well. So I was really just drilling. It really can be quite tedious learning this stuff over and over. And I know people who, have started the CCDE when I was studying for it, taking a break, and then lockdowns happened or whatever, and then they've came back to it, and they're like, I'm just going over the same things over and over, and I'm finding it boring. Unfortunately, I don't have another solution for that. It's like you have to just get yourself into a position where you understand all of the technologies. And the reason that I mentioned service provider here is because that was my sort of weak area. Even though I had worked in service providers, I hadn't covered all of the technologies that were in scope and might be in scope for the the CCIE SP. I done Jeremy's boot camp, but I probably done it too early. And I think that any boot camp that you're going to do is final preparation, or like the last 3 months, I would say, before your exam. As are as many practice scenarios as you can find. So these might be home baked ones that you make yourself, or they might be ones that are stuff like Orhan's got some stuff. Martin Dugan's got some stuff. Jeremy's stuff, he's obviously passed that over to me to develop those. I also used Nick Russo's CCIE service provider book for some labs of certain technologies that I wanted to lab up and I didn't really know much about. So that was quite a good book. And then you've got INE, and then Safari has every like Cisco Press book going, plus any other book that you need to read. But as I said earlier, one of the things that you can probably focus on more is you can probably check out CCDE V2 is nearly leaving us, but CCDE version 3 has got a similar thing where it's the I can't remember it's a spreadsheet that basically tells you so objective 1.1 read optimal routing design chapter 3 or something like that. So I'll it's something CCDE study matrix, I think it's called, which is quite easy to find under the resources of the CCDE blueprint. So we are running a wee bit over, but maybe only be about 10 minutes or something like that. So this is really just the advice and the battle scars from my perspective. Hopefully I've covered some of it throughout, but these are just like really summarising and reiterating the points. Go deep on the lab technologies, but think about them at a higher level and how they interact. So if you want to learn how they work, I would suggest that you lab them up. But when you go into the CCDE exam, you need to like be thinking at a higher level in respect to, if you remember, like if you think about it like IP, if we just take MPLS, you think IP and then IGP, like so OSPF, IS to IS, you know what I mean, IS to IS, then MPLS, then MPBGP, which then breaks into like multiple different address families and things like that. So you have to really, my point there is that you have to understand that like if this is working but this isn't working, what might be causing it? And it might be one of these. It might even be something in here. It might be something in here. It might be a wrong IP address somewhere in the network. And you need to just understand, you know, the interdependencies between different protocols. So that's where I personally think that the lab side of it comes in. And it doesn't have to be, you know, a CCIE lab. What you could have is like a CE router, and it might actually, and then a PE, right? And it might even be as simple as this, PE, and then look back and a VRF. So VRF-A, so if VRF-A is here, and here, you know, your test, so that's a 1, 2, 3, 4 router lab that you might just want to test BGP, IPv4, unicast. And it might just be as simple as like, I want to check the MPLS LFIB to determine how something is working. And then you might go, right, well, let's add in another router here. It's a VPN v4/6 route reflector. So you can see you can test all this stuff in really small topologies. It doesn't need to be a 20 router lab. Be open-minded. Don't get defensive when people ask why, especially if you're in a study group. So I used to, at the start, because I was the Lone Ranger, and then I went into a study group, and people were like challenging things that I was saying, and in my job I was normally right in most things. And I'm not saying that as an arrogant way. I'm just saying most of the time I was right and I was correct in what I was doing in my job. But when you enter this realm, if somebody questions why, take it as, well, if the question's why, my response would be, what else can I do? Not, I'm right, you're wrong. You have to like open your mind, be open-minded, and then that goes the same thing as the exam. When an exam asks you the question, you have to really ask yourself, what is this question asking me? What is it asking me to solve? What challenge is it asking me to solve? I would say have good people. This is a life tip though, more than a CCDE, but the same thing works. Have good people around you. If you get toxic people around you or negative people around you, get rid of them, and find people that are going to support you, because this is not an easy exam to pass. So being on point and things with your family, with your peers and colleagues, so surround yourself with positive people wherever you can. But I say that's something I've learned in life more than CCDE. But for something like this that takes this amount of commitment, 100%, you need good people around you. And that's like not necessarily people that live in your street or your friend circle. Start networking with people in the networking community. People will help you. There will be some people who won't be interested in helping you, or say they'll help you and they won't. But there's a lot of good people out there, and don't be sort of overawed by names or reputations or things like that, because most people are all right and good, in my experience in the networking industry. So I had no CCIE. Not sure if that was the smartest move. Despite having a lot of experience, there's not many CCDEs that have no CCIEs. But to put it into context, the guy that wrote the first CCDE book, Marwan, has no CCIE, or he had no CCIE when he passed his CCDE. So it is possible. What I would say is that the thing that I think would have perhaps benefited me would have been having an understanding of what an 8-hour exam process is like. Although the CCDE is very different to the CCIE, being in that 8-hour pressure cooker, and you will go through an emotional roller coaster in the exam. If you've sat the exam, you'll know that already. At one point, you might be sweating. At one point, you might want to just walk out. At one point, you might be feeling brilliant, like it's going the best. And then at another point, you might be in scenario 3, and then you can't remember whether the question is asking you a question about scenario 3, 1, or 2, and you get mixed up in your head, and you just need to try and find a way how to stay calm, and just say to yourself, this is all right, it's fine, I'm okay, stay calm, look away, read the question again, and then just try to answer the question. And if you don't answer the question, you'll never get any points. If you do answer the question, you might get a point or two. So the reason that I mentioned the CCIE is not so much about the technology, but the process and knowing what expert exams are all about. So that's why, I think that it maybe would have been better if I, but it is what it is. Everyone's got their own path, right? If you've got a family, be prepared to miss out on I think I should say, be prepared not to miss out on, but more so juggle things. It can be like extremely tough, which I'm sure if you're studying all the time, you'll know that already. When I was doing the CCDE, my wife worked at the weekends as well, and I had a 2-year-old. So I was going from, I remember attending one of the Saturday 3-hour calls on the way back from a kid's birthday party in the car on a WebEx. So I had my 2-year-old in the back of the car, and I had my hands-free WebEx open, and I was just listening to the conversation. That's like, you have to, like, in my opinion, for this to pass the CCDE, you have to let it consume you, which sounds a bit extreme, but you have to live and breathe what you're doing. If you dip in and then take a bit of a break and then go away and then come back and then dip in and go away and come back, you need to go like it's like full steam ahead. Like you have to be relentless, and that obviously does have an impact on your family potentially, but it depends how you manage it. So I was doing like sort of up at 6 o'clock in the morning, getting an hour's worth of study in, then driving my 2 hour commute, listening to INE, working 8 hours in the office, then travelling an hour and a bit back home, spending an hour with my family, have my dinner, they go to bed at 9 o'clock, and then that was me till like midnight. But that's not like, I learned that wasn't a healthy way to do it either. I was trying to compress things too much. So you just have to find the right way to balance things and set expectations. And also, like, so the final part, and this goes for the exam as well. Sometimes when I was learning some of these new technologies, or technologies that I wasn't that familiar with, I would like be hammering it like day after day after day. Let's say it was L2 VPN and BGP auto discovery with L2 VPN. I was like, I'm just not getting this. I'm not getting it. And I couldn't, like, so when I was going down to the implementation detail, I just did not, I didn't get it. I just did not get it. And I then would go away from something and not even look at it and switch to either a different technology or a lab or something like that. And then a week or a couple of weeks later, after it had sunk in, I would go back to it and I was like, why exactly did I find that so difficult? Because you just do this and then this, and the impact it has on the rest of the network is this, this, and this. And, you know, I've got a bit of an addictive personality when it comes to like getting things done. So I don't like leaving things unfinished. So I was obsessing over the fact that like I don't understand L2 VPN. And then that escalates in my head to if I get an L2 VPN question in the exam, I'm going to fail the exam because I failed it. And just it's like it's easy to say now in hindsight, but you have to just take some time to chill out and step away from things and relax and trust yourself and trust the process and not like rush everything. Because I wanted to get everything done yesterday as well. So those would be like sort of my main battle scars and things. And then moving on to like the implementation methodology. This is a wee thing that I'm going to incorporate into my training, and it came up in it as it's just had a like nice little catch to it. So the implementation questions, this little rhyme or whatever as you want to call it, pre-provision, cut over, and then decommission. So if you think about how you would actually cut over something on a network in real life, you know, you would get as much of it done up front as you can to either secure or prepare or preserve something, and then you would actually do the cut over, and then you would take the old stuff out. However, whether that was like configuration or actual replacement of devices or whatever. So pre-provision, you might want to enable QoS and security features before you actually then cut over a WAN circuit, for example. So you don't cut over the WAN circuit, have production traffic going over it, and then go, oh, now we'll put the QoS on, where in the meantime, traffic's either compromised or you're dropping packets if the link is busy or something like that. And then at the end, you know, you either take the old VPN tunnel out of the equation on the same router, or you remove the legacy routing configuration, or you take a device out completely. So pre-provision, cut over, decommission. Might not make sense now, but I would say if you keep that methodology in your head when you're doing the implementation questions, where it's like you've got all these things that you have to order, and then you say, right, that's one, that's step one, that's step two, that's step three, that's step four, that's five, that's six. If you keep this in your head, I think it'll definitely help. So, yeah, I did. I've not trademarked it yet, but I actually done another webinar with some of my other friends who were in the same study group, and I came up with it on that call because we were just talking, as you can tell I can do, and we were just talking. I said, so what you have to do is you have to pre-provision these things in advance, and then you do the cutover, and then you decommission anything else. And then I went, so pre-provision, cutover, decommission. It was an audio-based chat that I was having with somebody. I've got the recording, and actually on that I was like, right, I'm actually going to copyright that because it's quite catchy. So, but yeah, so that's it, guys. I mean, conscious of the time, I had this in for like a 2-hour window, but I only planned on doing it for an hour, so we've only went over a little bit. So the only other things that I don't have like a PDF to show it on, but one of the things that you can do as well, I don't know what you're all like with like highlighting. So if that's text, and then that's text, and then that's text, right? So what I'm trying to illustrate here, right, is that if you've got like a massive screed of text, right? So this could be like an A4 page of paper, and then the text, and then the squiggly line after it is where it says text, that's a relevant word. So let's say I'm reading this massive paragraph or page, and if I highlight, that's not working, highlighter's not working. That's a shame. Let me change my ink color to emulate a highlighter and make the ink color yellow. So let's say, like the highlighting function. So let's say if I highlight that word and then ignore the rest of that squiggly line, and then I go highlight that word, and then I go highlight that word. What I went from was highlighting that text plus the whole squiggly line, and then maybe just the text in the middle line, and then the whole line of the bottom line. But what we're actually trying to do is perfect, and it all comes back to the time management stuff I was talking about. So if you can highlight words, right, that word, and that word, and then you can skim read that, like so read this text really quickly, and then focus on this, and then sort of skim read or like read that really quickly, and then focus on this. So if these are the words that you've highlighted, you effectively go, if I read that, and that, I know what that whole sentence means. Does that make sense? Because what I was doing before was I was highlighting that, and then that, and then that, and it all looked like yellow. So then when I then went back to actually review a certain document, the whole document was nearly highlighted, and it was like it's as well as like not highlighting anything. So that would be my tip for like you highlight a word here, maybe a word here, and then a few words here, and then you can tie that together and skim through, speed read all this stuff. And if you miss words when you're doing that, because you've got these ones highlighted, you can kind of like tie the paragraph together without properly reading it. And that's how I improved my speed reading. And how I practiced that is I got a PDF and then used the highlighting function, and then highlighted words. So these words, and I practiced it in Safari Books or a PDF in Adobe Acrobat, and that's how I tied and improved my my speed reading. And that, I think that plus if you're going to highlight stuff, just use one color. Some people like use multiple colors, like purple for business requirements and yellow for technical requirements and red for constraints, and that to me just looks like, it's like Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. So it's again, it's the same. Unless you've got that system nailed. I actually do know somebody who done that and they passed the exam. So I'm not saying don't do it. Everybody's different, but my advice would be pick a colour, learn how to highlight the words that allow you to then tie, or relevant words. That's the key. Relevant words that let you tie paragraphs together in order to quickly understand what that document is about. And that would probably be my closing comment on my tips and tricks. So on that note, I'll stop the recording. Stop recording.